Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. It's a couch conversation. It's a conversation on the couch, except we're in bed. Okay. Welcome to the Trans Boss podcast, home of the Trans Boss movement. The place where empowered trans people come to discover what it takes to become the best versions of themselves. I am your host, Jasmine Vine, a Transfem trans empowerment specialist and the CEO of Javine, and I'm here to guide you on this empowering journey. In each episode, we'll dive deep into topics that matter to us trans people, like navigating through societal challenges, as well as building resilience and embracing an empowering mindset. We'll explore it all. We'll also bring on some incredible guests who are making a positive impact in the trans community. The Trans Boss podcast is your go-to resource for empowerment, hope, wisdom, and epic stories from empowered trans bosses across the globe. It's time to kick life's ass and create an empowered, authentic you. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Trans Boss podcast. So this is another one where Winter and I are just chatting. So this happens so often. We are scrolling on social media, we come across a certain idea and we discuss it in depth. And that is something that's come up for us today. And I feel like this is going to be a certain genre in the podcast. Like this is something that happens often. So Winter come up with a little jingle perhaps, because I was like, these should have a name. I feel like we need to give these a name. And Winter, what's the jingle? Oh, have you forgotten? Because I remember.
Oh, I remember now. It's a couch conversation. It's a conversation on the couch. Except we're in bed.
Except we're in bed. I feel like that's a thing now. We're going to have to record it together. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. It's a couch conversation. It's a conversation on the couch. Except we're in bed. Okay, so in this episode, we have just found a post that was really talking about the exclusion of non-binary folk from the trans umbrella. Not talking about it, it was kind of demonstrating it. And there's a few things that come up for us around that we'd really love to discuss on this episode. So the video that we saw was talking about neo-pronouns and the use of abstract neo-pronouns that aren't widely used. And the example that was used was TV static.
So yeah, it was especially kind of about noun-self neo-pronouns.
Yeah.
The question that started that video that the person was replying to was more so asking about other neo-pronouns like ze, zia, they, them, those kind of ones, but they weren't really addressed, so I don't think we really know what their stance on that was.
Well, it was asking if they accept people that use those pronouns, and the person was basically like, you know what? If you want to be called TV static, I will call you that. But you need psychiatric help, essentially was where that went. And there was a comment made about being transgender involves the gender binary. And that's what really started this whole thing. That's exclusion of non-binary folk, essentially.
And it's that idea and that way of talking or thinking about things is a stepping stone to trans medicalism. Yes. And the idea that, you're not trans if you're not binary, and you're not trans if you're not medically transitioning.
Yeah. They didn't specifically say that. However, like she said, that is a stepping stone to that kind of ideology. And so it got us thinking. We were reading some of the comments and there were some really interesting conversations happening in there. And something that, this wasn't in a comment, but we just started discussing it, was the gender binary, like trans needing to be associated with the gender binary. The binary itself is a white colonial ideology.
And we were also discussing that viewpoint comes from a place of white supremacy, of needing to teach other cultures and other people who are different from you that your way is the right way and your way is the civilized way, and that your way is better.
They conflate the word right and white. We do it the white way.
Yeah.
But that's a freaking thing. The gender binary, our understanding of what is masculine, what is feminine, what is male, what is female, is a colonial ideology. It is a white ideology that, being in Australia, it ignores the spiritual nature of gender. That's something that I'm really like, it takes out all of the spirituality of gender, especially in like Aboriginal culture. So if you don't know, I'm an Aboriginal person from Australia, but that understanding of gender has been pushed onto us, has been pushed onto Aboriginal people, just as it's been pushed onto people all across the world in Indigenous cultures. That's happened everywhere. And when you understand the ideology of gender from Indigenous cultures and like from different cultures around the world that hasn't been whitewashed,
which isn't many,
there's so much more depth to it. Like gender has so much more depth. And in like the brother boy and sister girl kind of ideologies from Aboriginal culture, like in Australia, there's this deeper spiritual understanding of what gender is. And trans people were often celebrated in those cultures as spiritual leaders within their community because it was thought that they held a greater level of spiritual awareness, a greater level of spirits within them, which to that culture was actually a sign of wisdom, which is really freaking interesting. And all of that, I feel, has been stripped when it comes to what transgender actually means in, the whitewashed ideology. It has much more of a negative connotation. It is very medicalized, and that's where like the transmedicalism side of things comes from. It's very medicalized. The spirituality has been stripped out of it.
And I think not just the spirituality, but the idea of a gender binary erases the cultural context of gender across the world. There's so many different cultures and so many different groups of people that had really nuanced, complex understandings of gender, and so much of that has been erased.
Yeah, that's a really interesting part of it. But back to the video, because there was more in there. Like when we're talking about neo-pronouns, particularly the fringe ones, like TV static that was being referred to, there was a comment saying that, and the person in the video kind of implied this as well, this perception that the use of neo-pronouns and expression of non-binary identities makes it harder for binary trans people to have rights. And this is something like, this sparked a whole freaking conversation, because like that has happened throughout history in so many different places, and within the queer community it has happened
multiple times.
Gay rights movement, gay people were othering bi people and saying, they are watering down the gay experience. I'm more normal. I just love, the same gender, and I'm over here, blah, blah, blah. And so there was this othering of bisexual people and standing on their backs and invalidating their identity in order to further the gay rights movement.
And even within these, our current understanding of these groups of like lesbians, even within that group, there was this kind of discussion of, especially between like butch and femme lesbians.
Yeah.
But then outside of that as well, it's happened throughout history to countless groups. And one in particular that came to my mind was women's suffrage. So when women's suffrage fights were happening...
Can you just explain, what women's suffrage...
So women's suffrage is essentially the right for women to vote. So suffrage is the right to vote that people have. And in the fight for women's suffrage historically, and obviously this is very tied to Western ideas, Black women were often excluded from that fight because there was this idea that including Black women in your fight for women's rights to vote would muddy the waters and make it more difficult to get that right and have people view them more negatively because of a lot of the other ideas around racism and things like that.
Yeah, and so because they had an extra adjective, a certain adjective, being Black, was excluded from the fight, even though they share the adjective of women.
Yeah, and so
interesting. Which happens, by the way, in trans women and cis women. But anyway,
it's this idea of, oh, I'm a woman, I'm just a normal woman, and you're a Black woman. You're a trans woman. You're a etc., etc., etc. It's this exclusionary idea of, oh, well, my identity and the way I feel is valid, but I don't understand your experience. So your experience isn't valid.
Yeah. So that has happened throughout history in so many freaking areas. And it's happening today. Currently there are so many trans people that invalidate non-binary people's experiences because they the same ideology. They think it muddies the water. They think it makes it harder for them to further trans rights. And here's the thing. I agree. I actually agree, because often the idea of that is, oh my goodness, let me just, there's context here, just bear with me. People are often against validating non-binary identities because there's the perception that if they do that, then it's going to set back trans rights. It's going to make trans people seem less normal because they're conflating the idea of non-binary with trans. And so there's a lot of trans medicalist kind of views and people that would say that that shouldn't be happening and that it is setting back trans rights and it's, stopping the real trans people from getting help and that kind of idea. So I can understand where they're coming from when they say that.
And that happens, that within the trans community itself, that happens multiple times with trans medicalism of if you're not transitioning or you can't transition medically, you're not really trans. And binary trans people saying if you're not binary trans, then you're not trans.
Yeah.
It can happen within the non-binary community of people who are non-binary saying, oh, well, you use neo-pronouns and so you're not really trans, you're just...
Yeah, it happens everywhere. And where does that come from?
Fear.
I think fear is definitely a big one there. But the whole thing of, it makes it harder. This was a comment, actually. It makes it harder to study and diagnose gender dysphoria. That was something that someone commented when they were talking about the use of neo-pronouns and all of that. And they're like, you can't identify as a TV. That makes it harder for the real trans people, yada, yada, yada. Now, from their perspective, like I said, I can see where they're coming from. They said, conservatives are going to weaponize that against trans people. And it's going to set the movement back and this, that, and the other. And I can understand where that fear comes from, because conservatives do that. That does happen. Like, that is a genuine fear.
And I think the specific thing that they were saying was that conservatives will use that to invalidate all trans people.
Oh, and that they're not going to to differentiate between non-binary people and trans people.
And the way that comment read, a lot of it was essentially, to me at least, saying, oh, if we accept you into the community and we accept that you are part of the community, then conservatives aren't going to validate us.
Yeah.
So that's why I am invalidating you and why I need to invalidate you. Because as long as you're trying to be valid, I'm not going to be valid.
Oh, so the idea of validity, let's look at that. Because inherent in the idea that there is validity, there is a presupposition there that there is invalidity, right? Both of those exist in our perceptual sort of ideas, right? So valid compared to what is what I want to ask, because validity is relative. And that is what is used in those arguments all the time, is that normal is relative, validity is relative. And so trans people saying, oh, these non-binary people, they're not valid, they're just conflating this idea of blah, 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 and they're, using this and they don't understand the trans experience, blah, blah, blah. That is essentially, well, it's invalidating their experience, for one, but it's also this idea of relative validity and saying, well, I'm more valid than this person because I can be perceived more like the majority population. I can be perceived more similar to the, what's the word that I'm looking for here? There's a word.
To the social norm?
Well, yeah, to the social norm. To what we, in a societal sense, consider the social norm. So if you can be considered closer to that, and then you're using that as a springboard to say that other people that aren't as close to that social norm as you are invalid in order to increase your own validity in the majority's eyes, that is just kind of a shitty thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah. And something just occurred to me. That idea, that concept is like, it is a colonial effect. Because the idea is,
well, it's who sets the standards.
Yeah, but valid compared to what?
Yeah.
Valid compared to the white colonial idea of gender. That's the basis of this whole ideology.
Yeah.
Is that whoever's closest to this colonial idea is the most valid.
Yeah. Whoever's closer gets the most gold stars.
And that, I haven't thought about it that way before, but now that I am, that makes so much sense. And it really, to me, demonstrates just how
insidious,
ingrained white colonialism is.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and as a white person, a lot of the nuances and the aspects of white colonialism aren't as apparent to me. Just inherently, because I am white, I exist within that context. I do try my best to be aware of things and understanding of different things, but this way of thinking about it, and this understanding that I just got of that idea is a bit eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
Because,
it's pretty freaking interesting, isn't it?
Definitely. And I'm sure a lot of people already understood that. and already knew that. But
well, then again, there's different ways. Like when we conceptualize something in a certain way, we understand it on a deeper level. You can learn the same thing in 10 different ways, and it can be mind blowing every time.
yeah.
And that's something I haven't thought about it that way either. And I'd be curious to know, like, the people listening to this, especially if you're on the YouTube, like, hop in the comment section. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. But as well, this relates to this idea of, the term is like pick-me's now.
Yeah.
And I've been called a pick-me a few freaking times because I actually consider the other person's perspective and I consider where that's coming from on a deeper level. So when someone comes out with all of these ideas of like, oh, well, you know, you're just diluting the trans experience and you're making it harder for us to get rights and conservatives are going to turn this around and use it as fire, blah, blah, blah. I can empathize with that person. I can stand in their shoes and go, you know what? I could see how it could feel that way. From your model of the world, I could see how you would think and believe and feel the way that you do. That doesn't mean I agree with it. I have my own freaking thoughts, opinions, and beliefs for myself. But whenever I actually dive into that and validate it and go, okay, yeah, I can see where that's coming from. There's a fear there, and I will validate the genuine fear because I actually agree that conservatives will use that against the trans rights movement. But that is not an excuse to use your freaking ideas against other people that you don't view as to be as valid as you. So this idea of a pick-me, sorry, Winter, did you have something?
I just wanted to add that I think this is where people, I guess, misunderstand you. And I think it's where we've had some misunderstandings before.
Oh, 100%.
Is you will look at the other person's opinion and you will validate their feelings.
Not their opinion, their feelings.
But when you're talking about that,
sometimes
it can be difficult to realize that you're not talking about your personal opinions. You're talking about their opinions. And you're validating their feelings. And that can sometimes sound like you're validating their opinions and you're saying them as your own.
And I can freaking understand that perspective and that view as well. It's frustrating to me.
Yeah.
But I can see that.
And I think the crux of that is that language isn't perfect.
Yeah.
The way that we talk about things isn't perfect. And, you know, we're all doing our best to try and be understood.
Yeah.
And I think that relates to another thing we were looking at in that.
Hold on a second, though, because there's one more thing I wanted to say on the whole pick-me's part.
Yeah.
Because we've spoken about, you know, people jumping on the backs of other people in order to further their own rights, like all of that. That's a thing that's happened throughout history in many different groups. But one thing that you mentioned before as well is that there's still part of the marginalised and oppressed group.
Yeah. Yeah. So you look at a lot of the conservative gays or groups like...
Well, there's an organisation, Gays Against Grooming.
Yeah. Groups like that. There's one in England that I can't remember the name of at the moment. I'm blanking on it. But it's the LGB Alliance.
Oh,
that's right.
Gosh.
Groups like that that position themselves within the majority group.
Within the cultural norm.
Yeah, they position themselves within that. And they say, essentially, we're the good ones. We agree with you. These people like over here.
We're more normal. We have your ideologies. Yeah.
And we agree that these people over there, they're not valid. You know, so we agree with you. We're with you. But the misunderstanding from them is that you might be with them, but they are not with you. A lot of conservative
they will use that
people.
to further their own agenda.
Yeah. And I think a lot of conservative people, especially like conservative politicians,
Yeah.
they don't believe, and I suppose, this is potentially me projecting what I think they believe. They may not actually believe this, but it seems like what they believe is that gay people are not valid, but they will use these gay people and essentially they will save them for last, to be the last group to strip the rights away of and eradicate, because they can use them to remove the other groups.
Yeah, these are the good gay people. But then when all the other gay people are gone, then the good gay people are suddenly the bad gay people. Because again, it's relative.
Yeah.
Interesting. That, oh my goodness.
And there was part of that discussion when we were having it before that I brought up, which I won't go into much because I don't exactly remember how it goes, but the idea of face-eating leopards and a group of people going to...
See, that's not a term I've heard before.
Yeah,
face-eating leopards.
It's essentially using face-eating leopards as a synonym for the oppressive group.
Can we adopt a face-eating leopard and call it Co?
Okay.
Okay, beautiful.
But essentially...
Avatar The Last Airbender reference, if you don't realise.
Essentially, the idea is that some of the marginalised group go to the oppressive group, the face-eating leopards, and say, oh, we agree with you. These people aren't valid. We're with you. And so they help the face-eating leopards to eat the faces of the other groups. But then when there's no other oppressed groups left, it's that original group that went to the face-eating leopards that they then get their faces eaten. And they're sitting there going, oh my God, I didn't think that the face-eating leopards would eat my face because I was with them.
Yeah.
And it's a more dramatic way of understanding the pick-me's, as we call them today.
You know what? Immediately, well, there's someone that comes to mind. I forget her freaking name, though. It's Kelly something. Kelly, I don't remember. But I'm sure...
Callaghan.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I literally saw a video from her on Twitter where it was literally that thing. She was like, I've stood up for you people. I've said that these non-binary people are blah, 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 blah. Like, all of the sort of ideas. And she was shocked that the conservative people were still going after her and invalidating her and her identity. At least that's how it came across to me. She's like, it's almost like she felt really betrayed. She's like, she's not fitting into the trans community because of her ideals or blah, blah, blah. But her ideals more aligned with the majority or whatever, or the the other people. And then when those people didn't accept her as one of them, she felt betrayed. At least is how it came across to me.
She likely views herself as part of that group or as with that group. And so when they go, oh no, you're not one of us, that would be a shock. That would be... That's
painful, dude.
Yeah, and that happens in so many different groups where it's just this idea of like invalidating or excluding people from your group because they are slightly different.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think with that, the exclusionary ideas come from, I think, fear, as we discussed. But it's also, you don't understand other people's experience.
Yeah.
You don't know their experience.
It's not possible for you to.
It's not.
Whenever trans people come to me and they say, oh, I people don't understand me, I feel so misunderstood. I'm like, of course you do. Because those people, even if they have positive intentions, they're never going to understand what it is like to be trans if they are not themselves. They can understand it conceptually on like a logical sort of level, but they're never going to feel it.
Yeah. And even like you and I, we're both trans, we're both non-binary, but we don't actually understand each other's experience.
No.
We may understand some parts of it.
Yeah.
But the experience of life, of society, of culture, of gender, all of those different aspects as a whole, it's not understandable to other people.
Okay, I have a rabbit hole that I want to go down. Can I go down it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole because those of you who, I guess, know me, know my background, expert in the workings of the unconscious mind, this is something that I love to dive into, and it's the use of language. And it is how we conceptualize different things and how that affects how we think, how we feel, how we behave, what we believe. And one thing I just want to say is part of the reason we can't fully understand somebody else's identity is because each second there are hundreds of millions of bits of information that are present. We can only consciously process about 20 to 200 of those bits. What that means is that we have to filter dramatically in order to create an understanding. So through that filtering process, we delete information, we distort information, we generalize information. A lot of that is based on our own past experiences, our beliefs, our background. It may be our culture, it's our language as well. Now, when we think about language and how we understand particular words and what they mean, it is different to every person.
Yeah.
Every person has a different understanding of what a word means. I could throw out the word empathy and ask 10 people what it means to them, and they could have a different response. It might be similar. There'll be similar undertones because we've got, a certain base level understanding of things. But here's the difference. Because we are processing that information differently, every person is going to assign an internal representation to what that word means. So that means how we process the word based on our experience, our senses, is going to be internally coded in our mind. So empathy, one person might think of their mum. They might think of their mum being really kind to them and coddling them when they were unwell. That might be an internal representation that comes up. When we have that internal representation, it is attached to a feeling. It is attached to a belief. It is attached to, like, everything. We have feelings, we have cognitions, and we have, memories and whatnot attached to it. And our senses, there might be a smell attached to it. We might associate empathy with the smell of lavender. How freaking interesting is that? Do you find this interesting? Because I geek out on this.
I do.
But basically what I'm saying is that you can explain something to someone freaking 10 ways before breakfast and they won't fully understand your experience because they're not associating the same things with it. Now, I swear I was going somewhere with this because this idea of how we actually code certain words within our minds relates to neo-pronouns to me. Because there was someone that said in the comments of this video, gender is not when you feel different and don't fit in, and so you use void or void self pronouns. And to me, that put a flag in my mind because I was like, oh, that's really interesting. First of all, what is gender? We'll go into that rabbit hole in a second. But the use of, let's just go with that example, void or void self pronouns, when you feel different and don't fit in, and so you use those pronouns. That's how that person conceptualized it. And they're presumption is that a person is using void or void self pronouns because they feel different and they don't fit in. That might be a reason. It may not be. It depends how the person actually conceptualizes gender. And Winter, can you actually talk about, because you were describing gender in some interesting ways. We were talking about autistic people and how autistic people don't often understand cultural, societal...
Social constructs.
Yeah. Autistic people don't understand social constructs. And you were describing gender in a really interesting way. Can you please reiterate that?
Oh, I'll have to see if I can remember it.
There was something about an ocean and a vastness.
Very quickly though, I just want to jump on that comment and say, they're saying gender is not when you feel different. And in a lot of that comment, they were talking about gender dysphoria and how
it was very
those kinds of things are not gender dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't gender dysphoria feeling different? Whoa.
Hello, lovely. If you like what you're hearing so far, and I hope you do, then you are going to love the free trainings that I have. So these trainings have helped hundreds of my own clients and my followers get into a place of empowerment, loving their authentic selves with more hope, comfort, confidence, and safety. And that is really what we're all about here. So if you're listening to this podcast, there's something for you, trans or not, whether you're interested in trauma healing or, learning to live a more empowered life, in control life, or if you're just sick of your voice getting you misgendered, then these trainings break down my core methodologies to help you with all of that and more. And it's the methodologies that I use with all of my clients. So you can register for that via the link in the description box below, and I will see you there. Mwah. Now let's get back into the episode.
Isn't gender dysphoria an incongruence with your body or with
You're not
your
wrong.
expression or with whatever?
Well, gender
and
dysphoria, how it's described in the DSM-5, is an incongruence between one's perceived or felt sense of gender and the gender that was assigned to them at birth. Or it also describes a strong desire to act, behave, or be a part of a group or gender that is not aligned with the gender they were assigned at birth.
And so feeling different is that not at the crux of what gender dysphoria is?
You're not wrong.
There's a difference in how you're feeling compared to how you're expected to feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So them saying gender is not when you feel different, isn't it?
Interesting. Well, gender dysphoria in particular.
Well, yes, gender dysphoria.
But
okay. Yeah, to go back to what you're asking me, I've previously...
Okay, can you just say, because you were saying something about how autistic people have less synaptic pruning.
Yeah, so synaptic pruning is something that happens during... Oh, I can't remember exactly. Don't quote me on this. I believe it's kind of during late teen, early adult years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where your synapses... So during childhood and during your growth, your brain creates synapses and connects a lot of different things.
Do you have a definition of what synapses is?
I will in a second.
I will in a second once I've Googled it.
Synapse. Okay. So, in the nervous system, a synapse is a structure that permits a neuron or nerve cell to pass an electrical or chemical signal to another neuron or to the target effector cell.
Right. So it's referring to the neural pathways within our brain and the connections that we make.
Yeah. If we think of neurons as houses or shops, the synapses are the roads that connect them.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense to me.
And so, as you're growing, lots of roads are built. Mm-hmm. When you get to a certain age, I can't exactly remember, the roads are cut off, removed.
Yeah.
A lot of them are pruned and unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
But research with autistic people has shown that there is a lot less synaptic pruning. So there's generally a lot more connections between the neurons in an autistic brain compared to an allistic or non-autistic brain.
So when we think of autism and like autistic people not understanding social constructs as much, there's also this idea of like very abstract thinking that autistic people have. And they make connections to things that other people might not, right?
Yeah.
Now that's, that's a generalization because everyone can do that, but it's prevalent quite a bit in autistic people where they'll make connections between things that other people would go, what? How is that connected for you?
Yeah.
Right? Now, oh gosh, I was going somewhere with that. Having more neural pathways that have not been pruned would create different understandings of gender for those people and different understandings of social constructs.
Yeah.
Which is why a lot of autistic people don't understand gender, right?
Yeah. And, just by the fact there's more connections, there's more ways for neurons to send information around. And so there's more happening, I suppose, you could say.
Which I'm assuming also contributes to the...
things like overwhelm.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so...
sensory overload, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, where, there's just too much happening that your brain struggles to be able to focus on the one thing. So like with sensory overload.
Okay, now hold on.
Sorry, I'm getting...
I feel like we just did like 3 tangents because all I wanted to know from you was your understanding or how you conceptualize your gender and how you describe that as an autistic person.
So I feel like we need to talk about what gender is.
Can we start with how you would describe it, please?
Okay, so the way I can describe my sense of gender is, I suppose, quite complex, and it relates a lot to abstract ideas and as well as things in nature. So when you think of gender, your gender specifically, what comes to mind? Well, at times I would relate my gender or liken my gender to the ocean, to this vast, seemingly endless thing that shifts and changes and has hidden unexplored depths. And it is empty, but it is also teeming with life. I could liken it to... So it's a very philosophical, metaphorical way of describing a felt sense, right? Yeah. Yeah. Because... And a lot of people, like if there's some conservative people or whatever listening to this, they're probably going to be like, what the hell are you talking about? Gender is man or woman. Like that's what it is. So this would seem quite abstract to someone who doesn't share that worldview, right? Yes. And I think it would make more sense to autistic people and especially also non-binary people and especially autistic non-binary people. To me, it's the feeling that encompasses. But like... can I just... Because that is going to have a different meaning to different people as well. And that's what I wanted to circle back to the void self pronouns. Because, the person saying gender is not when you feel different and don't fit in and so you use those pronouns. That is one way of conceptualizing it. That person, when they think of void
void self, they are clearly thinking of emptiness.
Potentially, yeah.
Now, to the person who's using those pronouns, I just want to say it could be something that is not overly healthy to use. It could be something that is empowering to use. It depends on that person's internal perception of what that actually means to them and what feeling that brings up for them. Because this person's perception, that could be how they conceptualize it. They could identify with void self pronouns because they feel like a misfit, they feel like they don't fit in, because they feel like no one understands them. And it could bring up inside of their mind, if I think of the word void, particularly void self, I actually think of an emptiness within my chest. And that is a way that I would conceptualize that. And if I were to say, that's unhealthy for you to use void self pronouns because, you know, if you're feeling this emptiness within yourself, then you should get some therapy and you should work on this, that, and the other in order to feel whole and to feel blah, 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 blah. But that is me projecting my conceptualization of what that means.
And to me, void self pronouns actually bring to mind my, like, another one of the ways that I understand my gender. Because
it could refer to vastness.
Like, you know, I can liken my gender and my experience of it to an ocean. Or I could liken it to the vastness of space.
Which could be considered a void.
Vast, empty void. That most of it, there's nothing there. There's occasionally a galaxy. But even looking inside a galaxy, the distance between suns is just unimaginable to us. The distance between asteroids.
It's a way of conceptualizing a gender experience. But one thing I just want to make clear here is, like, when I say it depends where it comes from, the internal representation that you have about the gender, what matters is how you feel about it. So if you're identifying with void or void self and it brings up negative feelings for you, feelings of being ostracized, feelings of no one understanding you, feelings of being on the outskirts, whatever it may be,
that's probably not very healthy.
No, that's something to have a look at. Perhaps you need to build community around you, people that do have a greater understanding of you and accept you for you. Like, that's an indication that there's some other deeper internal work to do. But if you identify with those pronouns because of something like what you're saying, Winter, that it just feels vast and expansive, that's a totally different thing. So what's empowering to one person may be disempowering to another, but we can't project our own experiences, or should not project our own experiences and our own understandings onto other people, because what's disempowering for that person, if they're projecting that on someone that's actually empowering for them, that does no good.
And I think a lot of the time these kinds of things, like, obviously relate back to language. And like you were saying before, but really the purpose of language is to convey ideas.
Is to have shared understanding among people.
And words and terms and labels and all of that.
Not even just among people and animals as well. There's different forms of language.
But
anyway, sorry.
Like, words and labels convey an idea. But they don't perfectly convey it, and they don't convey a perfect idea.
No.
For instance, like lesbian. That conveys an idea. There's a lot of discussion about what a lesbian is, though, and who is a valid lesbian, and etc., etc. And a while ago, I was seeing someone on TikTok, I forget who, but they were talking about, I think they were answering a question someone had asked of, could a cis man ever be a lesbian? And I loved this person's answer because they said, I don't know. I don't know of an experience a cis man could have that would have them identifying as a lesbian. But I don't know that it doesn't exist. I don't know that it couldn't exist.
Yeah, I love that.
Someone's experience with whatever term, with whatever label, it could exist. You don't know. Someone could identify as a man and have an experience that they feel is connected to the label man, but to everyone outside that, they don't understand because they don't know that experience.
Yeah.
And I think it's all too easy to invalidate people and invalidate people's identities and their experiences from a place of not understanding their experiences and not being open to the idea that there are different experiences, that not everyone who uses the same language as you has your same experience.
You know what? This is actually something that I teach clients in like the mindset space and the coaching that I do. I will always say to people that our reality is not objective. There's this idea that there's an objective reality, there's an objective right, there's an objective wrong, an objective valid, and an objective invalid. That is not true. Like, that is actually not true. And when you consider, here's me saying that's objectively not true. But from my perspective, when you understand how humans process information and the filtering process that we need to go in order to conceptualize information, there is no way to know if your perception is objective reality. What is objective reality? And on that, what is gender?
Yeah.
Because people have this objective view of what gender is, you're man or you're woman. And oh my goodness, there was a comment on this video that just blew my mind. Totally expanded my mind. I'm going to sound like a real old person, but I went and looked at this person's profile. I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so insightful for a freaking 19-year-old. This is like amazing. But what did they say? I forget what they exactly said.
I don't remember.
They were talking about gender in a way that I've never actually conceptualized it. And they said, can we just... okay, so they said in response to somebody else who was saying, like, gender isn't a thing that you put on. Gender's not an accessory, all this kind of stuff. You can't identify as a TV. Now, you might have a metaphorical understanding of, you know, what TV static means, and you could identify with that feeling, but that is not a gender, is what this person was saying. And it got me thinking, what actually is gender? And this person, in response to that comment, was like, well, gender is, far out, what did they say? They were saying it's identifying with, not identifying as. So relating to, not identifying as. And they used this example, and it's something that really has challenged me a lot in the past.
I'm trying to find it. But
Oh, it's okay. It's something that really challenged me a lot in the past, because there's this idea of like, oh, I identify as a wolf. You've probably all seen the video. On all levels except physical, I am a wolf. Whatever. And that has challenged the heck out of me, because I've gone like, absolutely not. Like, that is another species. You can't identify as another species. That is not a gender. And then I'm like, well, what actually is a gender? And this person making that distinction said that you can identify with or relate to things that aren't human. You can identify with or relate to a dog, for example. Let's just use that. And it's really challenged my thinking process on this, because I've gone, okay, it's not identifying as, but it's relating to. And then I was like, well, gender, is it not just relating to a specific group of people? Because gender, like the actual definition of gender, if you look that up, what is the actual freaking definition of gender?
Well, it depends on where you look.
It does depend on where you look.
Everywhere has different...
But we looked it up earlier, and it was basically identifying with a particular group of people. And so the dominant groups in our society are referred to as man and woman, right? Those are the dominant, most understood groups.
Here's so this is from My Health Alberta.
What does it say?
So it says, gender is social and cultural. It's how your identity relates to society's idea of what it means to be a man, woman, neither, or a mix of many genders. For most people, their gender matches up with the cultural expectations of the sex they were assigned at birth. This means they're cisgender. Others may self-identify as being transgender, agender, etc.
So it's identifying with cultural norms and group norms among a particular group of people. And that shifts over time. What is a cultural norm or a group norm among a particular gender shifts over time, and it shifts among cultures.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend about, the Greek culture, and we were in this whole discussion about masculine and feminine energies and whatever it means. And there's a different understanding among cultures. This idea of like the decision maker, or the one that's really forward and, more, dominating in their personality. A lot of people would identify that as a masculine thing. But that is a particular cultural norm, and it's a white freaking colonial perspective of what masculine is.
Heavily tied to patriarchy.
And another thing, like this person was saying, in their heritage, or like in their cultural background, the women in Greece were considered to be the decision makers, the ones that were like really, the same descriptor. So that kind of muddies the waters again there, where we're like, well, okay, what is masculine? What is feminine? What is gender again? And so when this person said it's, you can relate to certain aspects, you can relate to a damn TV. You can relate to TV static and the feeling that brings up. It's the same thing as like the whole void or the vast ocean. It's just another descriptor that we have an internal representation for and a certain feeling for. So why couldn't you relate to certain attributes or norms or cultural norms with a freaking something that's not human?
Yeah.
That is actually possible. And this is, honestly, I've only just had this realization, and it's challenged the heck out of me. Winter's just got this freaking, smug smile on her face.
Yeah, because, people relate to social constructs of masculine, feminine, of the idea socially and culturally of what a man is. But why is that any different from...
Golden Retriever boyfriend.
Yeah. Golden Retriever boyfriend, black cat girlfriend, those kinds of ideas.
Why is Golden Retriever I'm so sorry, I just got like super excited. Why is Golden Retriever boyfriend a descriptor that people are commonly using for people that is not in any way been prejudiced?
Because they're relating... Well, I don't know why it's not being...
They're relating characteristics that are typically associated with golden retrievers, which is a dog, that they are kind, friendly, perhaps a little bit dumb. Like,
And-
what's the thing?
I'm not exactly sure, but like,
But they're relating
yeah,
characteristics
kind, dumb,
associated
loyal,
with a dog.
those kinds of things. They're associating that specifically with the person's gender. They're associating golden retriever with boyfriend, with the fact that they're a man and they're someone's partner.
See, this is when my mind blows a little bit, because immediately I wanted to say it's not gender. I wanted to say that's characteristics, like personality characteristics. But when you look at the definition of gender, personality characteristics, and tied in with like gender expression and how we express ourselves, why is that not gender?
Yeah. And like what I'm saying though is that people relate it directly to gender without realizing it, I think, because they're saying he, him, this subsection of men, of partners, so relating it to both, I suppose, their gender and their relationship status. They're relating this concept of a golden retriever to that.
Yeah.
So
This
why is it
so
weird?
interesting to me.
Why is it weird for someone to relate their own gender to something else?
Now, see, I'm still working through this. I literally had this realization like 5 minutes before we hit record. But gender is so vague. It is so expansive and it is so vague, so that, like, I don't see any reason why you couldn't relate. If the definition of gender is relating to specific cultural norms or societal ideas, norms among a particular group of people, things, frickin' plants, I don't know. If it is relating to a particular group, then
I think so. Gender identity is someone's internal sense of gender.
and I want to emphasize spiritually as well,
Yeah.
because it's how we feel. What particular group of people do we feel spiritually connected to, and do we inherently want to be a part of and act as part of? That's a spiritual connection.
Yeah. I suppose what I was going to say is that gender identity is, in my mind, heavily connected with, and essentially it is, you can't disconnect it from the social and cultural context. Because the social and cultural context
It's a
is
construct. It's what makes it
inherent
up.
to the understanding of gender.
Yeah, it is.
If we didn't have the concept of men and women, people wouldn't be identifying as men and women. That's a social and cultural context and a social and cultural construct that gender is it's tied to. It can't be not tied to that in my mind, because if it's not tied to the social and cultural context, then what is it? What is it tied to?
And the social and cultural context is inherently reliant on the gender expression.
Yeah. I think
what gender expressions are culturally or socially considered to be a part of a certain group.
I think that is changing over time, slowly, but it is more common with younger people to be genderqueer or to be gender non-conforming in the way that they express themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, recently Harry Styles wore a dress on stage. And obviously conservatives got mad about it, because that's socially and culturally, in this era, which is another context of time,
Yeah.
that's not how men express their gender.
And can we just talk about culturally, like kilts, or historically, men wearing heels? Heels were made for men.
I think
it's just so interesting how that shifts over time. But anyway.
Basically everything that is, I suppose, like clothing, every clothing article that we think of as masculine or feminine today is incredibly recently that.
Yeah.
100 years ago, pink was a strong masculine colour, while blue was beautiful and dainty. People historically wore not pants, but other things.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Pants became this kind of status horse riding gear. And the wealthy would have, specific horse riding pants and so on. And as with a lot of things that the wealthy have, that's something that people aspire to have.
Because they want to fit that particular group societal norm. Because part of our human necessities, part of our human needs is actually a level of status. And so if we view a particular subset of people based on their norms, based on what they do, based on whatever, as a higher status, there is actually an unconscious desire to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. But anyway, I feel like we need to start wrapping this up because I actually committed to not going over an hour on the podcast episodes. And we're over an hour. But this has been such a good...
one more thing I really want to talk about.
Okay, though. One more thing.
Ties into the very last thing we were talking about. And the idea of like that high status, dominant culture thing.
Dominant culture, that's the word I was looking for earlier.
Okay. Yeah. But like that high status, dominant culture thing that a lot of people aspire to because it's kind of taught to them that this is what you should aspire to. Throughout history, that's been massively influential to so many things. Like, and the specific example that came to mind was wedding dresses. What colour should wedding dresses be?
Blue.
Okay, but seriously.
Orange. Okay, white.
Yeah. Do you know why white is the colour of wedding dresses?
From my understanding, it's purity.
Yeah, no. Wedding dresses used to be... Well, people didn't used to get a wedding dress made specifically for the wedding. Because making clothes is expensive and time-consuming. People didn't have the amount of clothes we have today.
It was a status thing.
Queen Victoria wore a white dress for her wedding, which when you think about a white dress is quite impractical because it's difficult to clean and easy to stain. And so wearing this white dress, it has that symbolism of purity, but it also has this symbolism of like extravagance and opulence, yes.
You own everything.
And it's also kind of this idea of wasteful wealth.
Yeah.
Where she gets this beautiful white wedding dress that's impractical to use for daily life. It's something that she wears only once. And for her to get that would cost so much money, especially to only use it once. That is an incredibly high status thing that influenced the entirety of Western culture following that. That to this point, we find it strange if someone's not wearing a white wedding dress.
Yeah, true.
And so when you think about things like that, I find it a lot easier to understand why some people invalidate others, especially with like gender, because there is this, it's not the same, it's not this high status thing, but it is that overarching majority culture.
You know what? It actually is a status thing though. If you are part of the dominant culture, the dominant group, that puts you at a higher status level than those that are in the minority.
It does. Yeah. And so from that kind of view of being taught to want to be part of that dominant high status culture, it would be easy to invalidate others.
Yeah.
But it does a disservice to everyone. And
but it's also like understanding the human nature side of it. What motivates humans? Why is that even a thing for us? Why do we strive for status?
I don't know.
Why? Because the striving for status is one of those things that causes us to invalidate others that we perceive to be lower status,
and I think,
or lower validity, which synonymous with lower status.
Status in general, I think, can be. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's inherently negative, but I do think most of the time it's extremely negative, especially you can look at a lot of different things and how status plays into that. But a lot of the time I think status gets into people's minds when they have a high status, that because of that status they're better. And that's,
It's
I
the
think,
better
where I'll
than
leave
thing.
it.
Yeah.
We could go into that, but I think that's a conversation for another day.
I feel like the last 5 minutes is probably a conversation. It ties in, but it's another conversation as well. So, okay, there you have it. There's our second conversation on the couch. How's it go?
It's
Couch
a couch
conversation.
conversation. It's a
Conversation on the couch. Except we're in bed. So I hope you enjoy this. Let me know as well, actually, if this is something that you want to see on a regular basis, these couch conversations, because let me tell you, they happen on a regular basis. So I'm thinking, why not just hit record and have a chat with you all as well as we do it. So this has been a really freaking interesting one. Like, all around the exclusion of non-binary people, this idea that there's a certain way to be trans, or the idea of valid or invalid identities versus, ways of expressing gender, relating to the world. It's a big conversation, and I feel like we've covered so many aspects here. And I hope you found it as interesting as we have, because we've literally been like, like, there's been times where Winter's talking and I'm just like, jaw on the floor, like, oh my gosh, like pushing myself to not jump in. And I could see the same with Winter.
Yeah. And
it's really enjoyable. I love
so
these
much we
conversations.
could get into with this.
Oh,
there's so much more detail we could go into with all of the different things we talked about.
Oh yeah, we could do an hour podcast episode on every freaking aspect that we've spoken about. It's massive. So with that, we shall wish you farewell. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Slangerful.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Trans Boss podcast. If you support the Trans Boss movement, it would help immensely if you could leave a review on your favorite podcasting app, follow us, and share your biggest takeaway from this episode on social media. Don't forget to tag me at jasmine.vinee on Instagram, because I would love to see it. Now get out there, do the things, and take the next step into that empowered life you deserve. See you next time.